A Tiger I sits motionless in the mud. Engine dead. Tracks half buried. No shell hole in the hull. No scorch marks. No sign an enemy gun ever found it. It wasn't the enemy that stopped this tank, and it wasn't alone. In one reported period in late 1943, fewer than 4 in 10 Tigers on a frontline formations roster were fit to fight. Not destroyed, not defeated in battle. Simply unavailable, broken down, waiting on parts, or stranded somewhere between the front and a workshop. That number is strange, because this was one of the most powerful tanks fielded in the Second World War. Armor that turned away most enemy guns at combat range. An 88 mm gun that could kill almost anything it faced, at distances few opponents could answer. So how does a tank like that end up sitting idle? The answer has almost nothing to do with the battlefield. This is the story of everything it took just to keep a Tiger moving, and how that burden became one of Germany's heaviest. The Tiger I entered service in 1942, at a moment when German commanders on the Eastern Front were desperate for a tank that could stop absorbing losses to Soviet armor. The response wasn't a lighter, simpler design. It went the other way. Frontal armor reached roughly 100 millimeters. At the center of the design sat the 8.8 centimeters K36, a gun that gave the Tiger exceptional reach against enemy armor at ranges most opponents simply couldn't answer. The result weighed approximately 57 tons, close to double a Sherman or a T-34. That weight solved a combat problem. It created a logistics one. A tank nearly twice the weight of a standard medium tank couldn't just follow the same roads and river crossings as the rest of the army. Bridge load ratings shaped which crossings a Tiger unit could actually use, often forcing longer routes to reach the front rather than the most direct one. The suspension carrying that weight was a maintenance problem in its own right. The Tiger used an overlapping interleaved arrangement of road wheels, a design that spread the tank's weight evenly and gave it excellent stability on soft ground. The cost showed up in the workshop. Reaching a damaged inner wheel often meant pulling off several outer wheels first. On the Eastern Front, mud and snow worked their way into the gaps between those wheels and froze overnight. Crews could spend hours chipping ice out of the running gear before a single tank was ready to move, before the day's operation had even begun. The weight problem didn't end on the roads. It followed the Tiger onto the railways Germany depended on to move it any real distance. With its 725 mm combat tracks fitted, the Tiger exceeded standard rail loading clearance. For rail movement, crews swapped in narrower 520 mm transport tracks, and on early production vehicles, several outer road wheels also had to come off to bring the tank within limits. That wasn't a quick job. Reconfiguring a Tiger for rail transport and reversing the process at the other end required trained crews, the right lifting equipment, and hours of labor at both ends of every journey. It was one more task standard German armor simply didn't need. Rail transport could get a Tiger to the front. Keeping it fighting once it arrived required a constant supply of something Germany was already struggling to guarantee. The Tiger's Maybach engine, the HL-210 on early production vehicles, later replaced by the more powerful HL-230, delivered the power that weight demanded. That power came at a cost in fuel consumption. Road range is generally reported at roughly 100 to 120 kilometers on internal fuel, and difficult terrain or cross-country operation could cut that substantially further. Every Tiger battalion needed a steady fuel line reaching it at the front, at exactly the point in the war when Allied air power was increasingly targeting German fuel depots, refineries, and transport routes. Fuel could at least be planned for. What happened when a Tiger broke down could not. The SD-KFC-9 Famo was one of Germany's principal heavy recovery vehicles, and even the Famo could be pushed to its limits by a Tiger. Under difficult ground conditions, or with serious damage, recovery crews often needed 2 Famos working in tandem, and sometimes more, just to move a single disabled tank clear. That was a heavy commitment of vehicles, fuel, and trained manpower for one recovery job, all while the front kept shifting around the crew doing it. In the fast-moving retreats of the later war years, some crews had no realistic way to recover a disabled Tiger before the front moved past them. Rather than risk the tank falling into enemy hands intact, they destroyed it themselves, often the same machine that had kept them alive days earlier. Every one of these problems pointed to the same conclusion: a Tiger could not be supported the way an ordinary tank was. Germany had to build something else around it entirely, because the Tiger demanded specialized transport, heavy recovery support, and maintenance crews trained specifically on its systems. It wasn't folded into standard panzer divisions. Instead, it was organized into independent heavy tank battalions, Schwere Panzerabteilungen, each carrying its own dedicated workshop, its own recovery echelon, its own rail preparation teams, and its own fuel allocation. The Tiger was not simply a tank. It was a logistical ecosystem, built new for every battalion that fielded it, a support structure larger and more specialized than the tank's numbers on a roster would ever suggest. That structure came with a cost that showed up directly in how many Tigers were actually available to fight. In that same reported period in late 1943, Tiger operational readiness stood at roughly 36% for the formation in question, fewer than 4 in 10 Tigers combat ready at a given time. That figure reflects one specific unit and period, not a wartime average, and readiness varied considerably by front, by season, and by the condition of individual battalions. Germany built approximately 1,347 Tiger-Is over the course of the war, already a small production run, made smaller still, in practical terms, by how many sat in workshops rather than on the line on any given day. A tank waiting for parts cannot fire its gun. A tank stuck in the mud cannot use its armor. On paper, Germany had a war-winning weapon. On the ground, on any given morning, a large share of them weren't there at all. The Tiger earned its combat reputation honestly. When it entered service, few Allied tanks could reliably match it in a straight fight, and its crews knew it. But every Tiger fielded came with a burden a larger, more standardized force didn't carry to the same degree. Routes to plan around load-rated bridges, tracks to swap for rail movement, a steady fuel line to maintain, and recovery crews built to drag a 57-ton tank out of the mud. That burden didn't collapse German logistics on its own, but it competed directly with fuel shortages, transport constraints, and a shrinking industrial base for the very same scarce resources at exactly the moment Germany needed simpler vehicles, built faster, in far greater numbers. The Tiger demonstrated the limits of building an exceptional machine when the system around it could never sustain it at scale. It never lost a battle to its own weight. It just never showed up to some of them.